The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going on about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going on about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, they received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat?" He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Well, good morning. I want to welcome Father Jorge again. Father Jorge has made our average clergy height 5'11". How tall are you? 6'3"?
Oh, no, just 6'2".
6'2", okay. So that's 5 inches more than our average, okay. Well, anyway, I just want to welcome you again. So this morning we hear a wonderful question, but it's kind of an awkward question for us, I think. Are you envious because I am generous? Now, we would expect it maybe to say something like, are you envious of another? But instead, it focuses back not on the person who received, but on the person who was generous, right? The person who gave. St. Thomas Aquinas said that, when you look at this envy, it's really sorrow at another person's good. Sorrow at another person's good. And in fact, there's a German phrase for it called Schadenfreude. I had to write it down to make sure I said it right. Schadenfreude. And what this is even worse. It's when you actually take pleasure at someone else's failure. So faith is a lived experience, right? And so my lived experience largely revolves on a golf course. I spent more time on a golf course in my formative years than certainly in a religious classroom or studying or anything else. So I learned a lot about my faith and a lot about myself and even about God, believe it or not, on the golf course. And one of these moments I can particularly remember when I was working full-time was on Monday mornings, I would wear a certain dress if Tiger Woods failed. So Tiger Woods, if you remember the pictures, you'll see him all over the commercials, right? What does he wear on Sundays? He wears black pants and a red shirt. Guess what I wore on Mondays? Black pants and a red shirt. Not when he won, but when he lost. Envy, right? Taking delight or pleasure in someone else's failure. Now, at the time, I wouldn't have recognized it as envy. I would have just recognized it as rejoicing, right? Well, why? Well, because Jack Nicklaus was my hero. And Tiger Woods, quite frankly, played better golf at his prime than Jack Nicklaus did at his. He broke his records, etc. And so his failure was my delight. Yes, even Deacon David. It's true. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's look at the Bible for a second. Did that ever happen in the Bible? Now, they weren't golfing, but there was plenty of envy out there, right? Think from the very first stories of Cain and Abel. Was Cain envious of Abel's gift and how God perceived that? Think about Jacob being envious of his brother Esau and conspiring with his mother to steal the blessing. Think about Joseph with his special coat, and what did his brothers do? Out of envy, sell him into slavery. Think of the envy of King Saul for eventually who would become King David. Think of the envy of the apostles when James and John asked to be at the right and their left of Jesus. How come you get to sit next to Jesus at the Last Supper? Can you imagine? Right? It's right there. And so what's difficult about this sometimes is when it's afar, we think it's rather harmless. You know? Tiger Woods would never know. But sometimes it's right next to us, and sometimes it's in a person that's close to us. Now, I was debating on whether to ask one of my good friends to come up here today, but he's wearing black shorts and a red shirt. Now, if that isn't a sign from the Holy Spirit, I don't know what is. So, Guy, come on up. This is one of my golf buddies. And you can take your mask off for a second and just don't breathe on me. Just kidding. And Guy and I played golf together yesterday. Now, like I said, it's hard sometimes to take joy in someone else's success when it results in your failure, right? So I'm playing against this clown. And yesterday, I have a birdie putt of about six feet away to win the hole. I'm going to win the hole. I'm convinced. He's 75 yards out. And what does he do? He knocks it in the hole. Okay, now you can go sit back down. I think there was Now, so he hits it in the hole. Now there's a reaction, right? Because now this is just about a nice golf shot, but now it's my loss. I can't beat him. He's in the hole. He's got a 3. I'm trying to make a 4. I've lost. Now, can I rejoice in that, or can I say, "Oh, that was just pure luck"? Well, that's maybe a little bit of both. But it's hard sometimes when it's someone close to us. I can admire the shot on TV, but when it's someone right next to you, can you say, "That was a great shot"? Not a lucky shot, not a good break or a good bounce, but that was a great shot. It's hardest sometimes for us to admire and compliment those closest to us. Because somehow, if we have that schadenfreude, it's like something else in us or something dies in us. So we lose something when we can't take pleasure in someone else's failure. We sort of have this sorrow, like St. Thomas Aquinas said, that's deep within us when another person succeeds. And so one of the problems with that is we sort of have what I would call a scarcity mentality. We sort of have this idea that if someone does something good, somehow there's not enough for me, you know? There's not enough to go around. The luck all got used on one guy, whose name happens to be Guy, right? So you kind of think that way, and yet with God, it's not that way. With God, we should always have an abundance mentality. He's the giver of all gifts. And yet somehow, we think when someone else gets it and I don't, who's at fault? Who's at fault? And many times, whether we want to admit it consciously or not, God's at fault. Because you know, God, if you really loved me, you would give me a singing voice like Kristen. If you really loved me, you would make me tall like Father George. If you really loved me, you would have made me hit that golf shot in the hole instead of that guy. See what I mean? We can go right there so quickly and not blame the other person, but we can actually go back to the source of all gifts and say, somehow I wasn't gifted fully. I wasn't gifted properly. And now I'm suffering to have to watch a golf shot, height, a beautiful voice, etc., right? So I think it's important for us to challenge ourselves. Do we really take joy in other people's successes, especially those close to us? Now, jealousy sometimes gets a little bit of a mixed review because I think jealousy really is a good thing if it can result in admiration. You know, we can look at that jealousy and say, I admire that quality, I wish I had that quality, and then maybe we can even work toward it. So if you're feeling a little jealous now and then, I think you're really experiencing the first part of going down a path of admiration. You really want to be like that person. You don't rejoice when they fail. You're not sorry when they do well. But rather, you want to be more and more like them. So I'm going to close with just a simple thought, which is don't get caught up in what I call the comparison game. Because I think as Catholics, we can really do this quickly. When we start looking around and saying, I'm going to compare myself to everybody else, instead of, am I really comparing myself to the person that God intends me to be? Now, Thomas Merton would call this my true self. Matthew Kelly would call it the best version of myself, those kind of things. But the idea is not to compare yourself against another, but to look at yourself and say, how can I be more and more like the child of God that He intended to create? How can I be more of that? Because we have to go to God for that, right? We have to go to God and say, help me be more and more what you want me to become. Now, thankfully for me, it wasn't golf. Otherwise, I'd be out there on Sunday morning still whacking balls around. But at some point, God said, I want more for you than that. So I think we have to be listening carefully. We have to be listening to the gifts God gave us. We have to be listening to Him say what His intention is for us, and then ask Him to make us more and more of what He wants us to be. And stop looking around at everybody else and saying, well, I go to church every Sunday. Other people don't. I go on holy days of obligation. I do this, I do this, I do this, as though somehow God would say, oh, that's really awesome, when in fact, what would be really awesome is if we would become the person He created us to be. So let's not get caught in that comparison trap, because it's so easy to do. And instead, rejoice, right? And be glad. And be thankful, even when someone gets lucky. No, it wasn't luck, right? It was skill. It was a talent that God gave someone, right? And rejoice in that. And not be down, oh, I lost, oh, this person's taller than me, this person sings better than me, etc. But instead, rejoice, because God is the giver of all good gifts. May God bless us all.